Alright, so now we're going to talk about building a Hello World application using MongoDB and the MongoDB Node.js driver. So, what is the Node.js driver, and what does it mean to be a driver for MongoDB? So, this is a little bit of our overall architecture. We have our MongoDB server listening here for incoming connections, and it actually expects BSON protocol. So this is a binary JSON, and there's a specific protocol for communicating with the database. And the idea behind a driver is the driver actually is a library in a specific language, in this case JavaScript, that will actually handle this protocol and handle this communication, handle opening sockets, handle detecting errors, handle connecting to replica sets, handle a lot of things behind the scenes that you don't want to have to deal with in your application code. So the idea is that you'll actually include the driver for MongoDB, the Node.js driver, and you'll use it in your application just like you would any other library, and it'll actually deal with communicating to MongoDB for you. So in this lesson, we'll talk about how to install the Node.js driver and how to use its API to actually connect to MongoDB and read a document. So let's take a look. So here we have our app.js file. This is our example application that we're going to use to understand the Node.js driver and how to use it. But before we get started, let's actually try to run it to make sure our application is complete. Alright, so when we try to run our application, we notice a problem here. We see that we cannot find module MongoDB. So the MongoDB driver for Node.js is actually a module. So here we can see that we can't find the module, which means we don't have our dependency installed. We don't have the MongoDB driver installed. So the way we do that is we use the package manager and just install MongoDB. Alright, so now we have our MongoDB driver installed. If we look in our directory, we see app.js, and we see a node modules file where the MongoDB driver is installed as a module locally. Now if we do node app.js, run our application, you can see we called find1. We got back this document with a name of MongoDB and this nice message here. So let's take a look at this application. So up here at the top, we actually have this require statement. You notice we require MongoDB. It's actually the same name that we use to install the module. And from that module, we're actually getting this Mongo client object. So this object is actually our interface into the MongoDB driver library. And through this Mongo client object, that's how we'll access the API methods to the driver, which will then handle whatever operation we requested. So now that we have this Mongo client object, we can go down here and see that the first thing we have to do is actually open the connection to the server. So this line here doesn't actually do anything. It's just basically getting us this object that we can use to interact with the driver. So the real work actually happens in this connect call. So right here we have Mongo client.connect, and we have this connection string here. This is actually a special connection string that the driver understands, and it uses this to connect to our running MongoDB server. So here we have MongoDB //localhost 27017, basically saying that we're connecting to a MongoDB running on our local machine on the default port, which is 27017. So if you run MongoDB with no arguments, this is the port that the database will be listening on. And at the end of the connection string, we have this /test, which is basically saying connect to the test database within this MongoDB server. So the interesting thing here is that we're not actually checking the return value. What we do instead is we pass in a callback here. So what's happening is that we call Mongo client.connect with this connection string and this callback. The driver will say, okay, I'm going to connect to this MongoDB instance, and I'm actually going to call this callback when I'm done connecting. So you notice this callback actually has two arguments. So because we're not checking the return value here, we need a way for the driver to be able to tell us what happened, give us the results of this connection attempt. So here in the standard Node.js style, the first argument here is an error object. So this will basically be set if any kind of error occurred. So we can actually check that, which we do right here, to see if we need to abort what we're trying to do. So how do these two arguments actually get populated? So what's really happening here is that we're calling this connect call, sending in this URL. The driver is connecting to the database, and when it's done connecting, it'll actually call this callback that we've passed in. So if there's an error, this error object is populated, and we throw the error. if the connection was successful, the driver will actually call this callback that we passed in with the connected database object. So this object is also part of the driver. You can think of it kind of as a handle for our database connection. So from now on, in this function, in our callback, we can use this database object to perform operations using this already connected client. So if we look down here, we can see that we're taking our connected database object, calling db.collectionCall to tell the driver which collection we're interested in. Then we're doing a find one against that collection with no query selector, and we're also giving that a callback. So again, this callback is passed into the driver, and it will get called when the operation is complete. And if there was some kind of error, the driver will pass in the error object with some information about what happened. And if the query was performed successfully, this second argument, doc, will be populated with the result of our query. So in here, we can check the error, we can print the result, and then we just close the database connection. So again, this is our connected DB object. We're still referencing the one that we got in our original connect callback, and we can just close it. So down here, we actually say called find one. So notice that this will get printed first because of our asynchronous model of calling this function and not waiting for a return, but instead passing a callback to say, call this callback when you're done. So it'll actually execute this line, then execute this line, then this callback will get called after the round trip to the server. Alright, so this is a basic Hello World application using the MongoDB Node.js driver. So let's just run this one more time. Node app.js. So now we know that what's actually happening here is that we're connecting to the database, and then once we've connected, we actually do a find one and print out that we called it, and then when we get the response, we'll print the document. So that's the basic Hello World application using the MongoDB Node.js driver.